again, welcome back. In this hopefully significantly shorter little video, I just want to highlight some really important issues around the importance of independence of advice. Now, this forms part of our duty to the client, but is also relevant to our duties to the courts and to third parties as well. And as lawyers, we basically have a fundamental obligation to ensure that so rule 4, clearly we've already been talking about this, acting in the best interest of the client, to be honest and courteous, to deliver legal services competently, diligently and promptly, all things that we've been talking about so far, to avoid our compromise to our integrity and professional independence. So the independence is the part that I really want to focus on really quickly here, because it does play out in a number of different ways. The other place that you see this come out, and where it's particularly relevant, is when we talk about Rule 17, and particularly relevant to corporate counsel. So corporate counsel are, as you know, they're internal lawyers, so they're in-house in a corporation, and so they're internal to the corporation, unlike external lawyers. So they are employed by their client. So there's automatically, you can see this opportunity for a conflict of interest to arise. When your boss is telling, the one who makes a decision about your pay packet, your bonus, your ongoing relationship with the organization, then it can be very tempting to tell the boss what they want to hear, like at risk of totally oversimplifying things. And so that idea that we need to remain independent is absolutely critical, particularly to that role. So looking at Rule 17, I think pushes this out in quite a lot more detail. So Rule 17, again, I'm just referring to the rules here without giving you any kind of verbal reference. I've been speaking about Rule 4 and Rule 17 of the Australian Solicitors Conduct Rules. Now, there are similar rules in the barristers' rules as well, and together they're part of the package of legislation and regulation that makes up what we so lovingly refer to as the uniform law. So again, take a look at Rule 17. It refers to, in particular, it starts off with matters in a court, and uses the words, you must not, heavy language there, act as the mere mouthpiece of the client or the instructing solicitor. Barristers need to, or advocates need to, remain completely independent. So then what we've got is this sort of the broad rule, and then we've got the carve-out. So the circumstances in which the duty won't be breached. Now, this is important because, as is often the case, you'll be finding as you explore the uniform law is not very good at telling us what we can do, but it tells us what things won't be caught up in the prohibitions. So, for example, we've talked about this before, it doesn't define what legal advice is, but then it specifies certain things. For example, conveyancing. It won't be a breach of the prohibition against giving legal advice if you don't have a practicing certificate. If you do conveyancing, it's specifically noted in the requirements. So it doesn't tell us what legal advice is. It doesn't tell us that conveyancing is or isn't legal advice, but it just specifically says, well, you won't be in breach of that if you're actually a licensed conveyancer. So, and this is a similar example. So here, a solicitor does not breach the solicitor's duty to the client and will not have failed to give appropriate consideration to the instructions simply by choosing, contrary to those instructions, to exercise forensic judgments, to confine any hearing to the issues that are the real issues. In other words, deal with the moral hazard problem. You have a responsibility dealing with an issue that you know more about than your client does, in the sense of it is your responsibility to know and efficiently deal with the legal issues. Your client, as I often say, clients don't have legal problems. They have commercial problems, or they have personal problems that have a legal aspect. Your job is to unpick what is the law and what is the best strategy in the circumstances. It also won't be a breach of that duty if you present the client's case as quickly and as simply as may be consistent with its robust advancement. Not exactly plain language, but I think it makes the point well. And also to inform the court of any persuasive authority against the client's case. Now, this is part of our duty of integrity, is we are obliged, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a couple of weeks when we get to the duties to the court, to tell the court about everything that is relevant to making its decision, which may mean, well, which does mean ensuring that the court is aware of all of the relevant authorities, even if the authority is contrary to our client's best view of what the law is. And this is why, and it keeps coming back to, one of the things that we keep coming back to when we are marking your assignments, not just in this subject, but in many others, is we're looking not for a one-sided argument. We are looking for you to demonstrate that you've considered all of the authorities and that you come up with the answer, as opposed to just which authorities best support your client's case. And that's why making a good argument requires you to consider authorities that support both sides, and then to distinguish the authorities that don't support the view that your client wants taken on the facts or on some other element. Or if you can't, your job is to inform. Acting in the best interest of the client requires you to inform them that they do not have a strong case from time to time. A really good example of a breach of a range of the fundamental duties that lawyers have to their clients, it comes out of the fairly recent Lawyer X debacle. I'm going to use the word debacle. I was picking between fiasco or case study, but case study really doesn't do justice to it. So many of you may well be well and truly aware of this. Others, because you're relatively new to your law degrees, might have missed it entirely. And either way is fine. So Lawyer X is the pseudonym given to the lady whose face appears on the screen, Nicola Gobbo. She was a barrister. And she is really, well, she is in the middle of what is probably the biggest conflict of interest, breach of duties to the client case that Australia has ever seen. She's sometimes also referred to as, I think, witness 3838. Can't remember the number directly off the top of my head, sorry about that. For those of you who like to procrastinate study, in other words, find something that is relevant and interesting to what you're doing, but not exactly what you should be doing for studying, I highly recommend the ABC podcast about the Lawyer X debacle. It gives you some real insight into the way criminal law works, the way barristers work, the way that mental health and that personalities can impact the way that we work as practitioners. And look, at the end of the day, it's a riveting story well told. So what did she do? Between 2005 and 2009, she was involved in making in the order of 5,000, in fact more than 5,000 reports to the Piranha Task Force. So the crimes investigation task force, or the organised crime task force of the Victoria Police. She was working as a defence lawyer at the time. She represented a number of Victoria's most well-known, most infamous organised crime families, including people like Carl Williams, Tony Mockbell, and a range of others. She was essentially an informer, so actually where the number comes from, informer or witness 3838 was her police informant number. So essentially it's quite clear that she was in breach of her obligations to the client. she was giving confidential and privileged information that she learned in her capacity as a lawyer advising somebody who has been accused of a crime to inform the police about those crimes and other crimes as well. There have already been a number of criminal convictions overturned following out of the disclosure of this incredibly and obviously improper conduct and the Royal Commission that followed. And it is likely that will be significantly more to follow. So why talk about Nicola Gobbo here? In part, it's just because I didn't want this particular case study to get lost amongst the sort of broader and quite focused discussion that we had about conflicts of interest. Clearly, this is primarily a conflict of interest case, that she couldn't serve two masters. She cannot maintain her confidentiality and her obligations to the defendant, that she has an ethical and a contractual, for that matter, duty to defend zealously and act in their best interest if she's also informing the police. So clearly that's a clear conflict of interest, but it also plays out, and you can see quite easily how her lack of independence, so the actions that she has taken because she is a police informant, limited her ability to act independently and appropriately when providing that high duty, or purportedly performing that high level of duty to her client. Now, we'll probably come back to Ms. Gobbo on a number of occasions as we look at the duty to obey the law and what her obligations were to the court, because I think it's a really good case study and it's one that's quite easy to get a lot of information about. It's also a case that has gone all the way to the High Court, and of course there was a corresponding Royal Commission that some of you might be aware of. Sorry for my flickering slides. So quite a lot of information is available about that, and I think it really is a good situation to consider and to think through what the issues are. And I'm not making any promises, but it would certainly make a good kind of question or format for a problem-solving question in an exam, or maybe inspiration is a better word. So I think it makes a lot of sense for you to sort of think about Ms. Gobbo's situation. Make sure that you understand what she did and which of the rules she breached along the way. Now, she was a barrister, clearly. We tend to focus on the Australian Solicitors Conduct rules, but they're overlapping in that sense. So it actually gives you good impetus to work out, well, which rules would have applied if she was a solicitor, which rules would have applied if she were a barrister. Now, to finish off this kind of tiny little video with a few comments in it, I just want to point out that there are quite a number of rules that relate to the way that we manage our law practices. And again, all of these rules in some way go to the importance of maintaining the independence of our legal practices with other business or other activities that we have. And some of them go to the way that we actually act on or operate our duties in practice. So some of them you would think just overlap with the law generally as well. So for example, while the rules in relation to advertising legal practice have loosened up significantly over my life as a lawyer, when I started, it was not possible for lawyers to advertise as such. Now we have limited, some would say not limited enough, rules that relate to the way that we can advertise in practice. Some of this is covered in your reading, definitely worth having a look at. But also remember that, like everybody else, if we mislead or deceive people, doesn't have to be intentional, then we will be breaching the Australian consumer law, and breaching the Australian Competition and Consumer Act in particular. So again, there's a specific rule, but that conduct may well be conduct that would break another rule as well. We have obligations of supervision. So while you do not have a full practicing certificate, those people who have opted in to supervise you have duties under the law to ensure that they supervise you properly and exercise appropriate and responsible supervision. Also, the next group of rules on this slide really are the ones that go to that question of independence that I've been mentioning along the way. If we share premises with other people, we need to make sure that the client is aware of them so that we can maintain independence and that they can tell the difference between us and them. So if we share premises with an accounting firm or a psychologist or a ski instructor, it needs to be clear which parts of the service in the space are psychology, accounting, or ski instructing, and which parts are legal advice. And the client needs to be aware of the differences there. We also need to make sure that we do not share our profits with that psychologist or a ski instructor. Now, as the rules have loosened up, a lawyer can have multiple businesses, but they do need to keep all of their records and accounts separate. And then there are specific rules that look at particular businesses where there is opportunity for issues to arise. So mortgage financing and managed investments, these have come up a few times in relation to the rules, particularly when lawyers have promoted financial products to their clients and the clients haven't been clear on where they're receiving legal advice and where they're receiving commercial or financial advice. So have a look broadly at the general rules. Make sure that you've got a broad sense of what they are and where they are, and because basically anything can happen. And in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about information barriers. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Cheers.